the House of the Dead files. Officer Daniel Cole wasn't the superstitious type. A cop for nearly 10 years. He'd seen enough crime to know that the real monsters were human. Ghost stories were just that, stories. But when he was assigned to inventory old case files at the abandoned Fairview police station, he started to wonder if he'd been wrong. The station had been shut down over 20 years ago after a fire damaged half the building. A new precinct was built across town, and everything that wasn't destroyed in the fire was left behind. Over time, the place became a forgotten relic: dust-covered desks, yellowed papers, and filing cabinets full of unsolved cases. Cole had been sent to sort through them, alone. The first few hours were dull reading old police reports, bagging useless evidence for disposal, and marking files to be digitized. It wasn't until he opened a drawer labeled Cold Cases, 1987 to 1999, that things took a strange turn. At the very back, tucked between two thick folders, was a manila envelope with no case number, no markings. Just a single word scrawled in red ink. Unsolvable. Curious, Cole opened it. Inside were black and white crime scene photos. The victims were all different ages, different backgrounds, but the cause of death was the same. Their faces were contorted in terror, mouths open in silent screams. Their eyes, wide and empty, had been removed. Cole flipped through the reports. The murders had all taken place in the late 80s. No suspects, no leads. The only connection between them was the location. Every victim had been found within a 1-mile radius of the police station. His radio crackled. At first it was just static. Then, through the distortion, a faint voice whispered, "Help us." Cole froze. He was alone in the station. No one had used the old radio system in years. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The dim overhead lights flickered, buzzing softly. The place was silent, except for the sound of his own breathing. Then he heard it. A soft tapping sound. It was coming from the holding cells. Cole hesitated. The cells had been empty for decades. Yet as he approached, the tapping grew louder, rhythmic, insistent. He reached the first cell and shone his flashlight through the bars. Empty. Then movement. The beam of light caught something just as it disappeared around the corner. A shadow, a figure. Cole drew his gun. "This is Officer Cole. If someone's in here, show yourself." Silence. He stepped forward. The air was ice cold now. His breath came out in misty puffs. Then, the lights flickered again, this time going completely out. Darkness swallowed him. Cole's heart pounded. He reached for his radio, but the static was deafening now. A wall of white noise that made his head ache, and underneath it, voices, whispering, pleading, "He's still here. Find him, before he finds you." Then, a final whisper, right behind him. "Turn around." Cole spun, flashlight trembling in his grip. A man stood at the end of the hallway, tall, dressed in an old police uniform. His face was wrong, stretched, too long. His empty eye sockets, black pits of nothing. Cole's breath caught in his throat. The figure lifted a single hand and pointed at him. Suddenly, the station erupted in sound, slamming doors, shattering glass, radios shrieking with static. The walls bled. Cole ran. He didn't stop until he was outside, gasping for air under the flickering street. The old station loomed behind him, silent once more. The next day, he returned with backup. The building was empty. No signs of forced entry. No signs of anyone ever being inside, except for one thing. The folder labeled Unsolvable was gone, and on the wall of the first holding cell, scratched deep into the brick, were 2 words: "Still here." The killer who wasn't there. Detective Alex Carter had seen plenty of brutal crimes in his 15 years on the force, but nothing like this. The first victim was a woman in her mid, found in her locked apartment. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no weapon, but her body had been torn apart like she'd been mauled by something with claws. The second was a businessman, found in his office. The security footage showed him working late at night. Without warning, he was lifted out of his chair by an unseen force. He flailed, screamed, his body twisting violently in midair, before crashing against the wall. He never got back up. The footage was chilling, not because of what was there but because of what wasn't. There was no attacker, no shadow, no figure, nothing. And yet, the victims all reacted as if someone was right in front of them, brutally ending their lives. The department was baffled. Some officers whispered about things that didn't make sense, about curses or ghosts. Carter dismissed it as nonsense. There had to be a logical explanation. But then the bodies kept coming. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 more people were found dead. Same method, same lack of evidence. The city was in a panic. The media called the unknown killer the Phantom Butcher. Carter didn't believe in the supernatural, but after what happened next, he wished he did, because at least then, he'd have something to blame. The first clue. It was just past midnight when Carter sat alone in the precinct's evidence room, reviewing the case files. He had watched the security footage over a dozen times, looking for any sign of an intruder. But there was nothing, just the victims reacting to something invisible. Then, on a whim, he slowed the footage down, frame by frame. That's when he saw it. A shadow. Not in the room, but in the reflection of a mirror hanging in the background. It was faint, almost a distortion in the glass, like a ripple in water. But when Carter enhanced the image, his breath caught. A figure stood in the reflection, tall, thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its face was wrong, blurred, as if the camera refused to capture it properly. And then, in the final frame, before the screen cut to black, the shadow moved, not toward the victim, toward the camera. A cold shiver ran down Carter's spine. He sat back in his chair, his pulse hammering. For the first time since this case started, he felt real, genuine fear. His phone buzzed on the table. Unknown caller. He hesitated before answering. Detective Carter. Silence. Then, and underneath it, a whisper. "You see me now." Carter's blood went ice. The line went dead. His hands trembled as he looked back at his laptop screen. He pulled up the footage again, zooming in on the mirror. And that's when he noticed something that hadn't been there before. The figure wasn't just in the mirror anymore. It was standing behind him. The hunt begins. Carter spun in his chair, heart pounding. The evidence room was empty. He grabbed his gun, his instincts screaming at him to run, but he forced himself to stay. He was a cop. He didn't scare easily, but as he looked around the room, something felt off. The overhead light flickered. The temperature had dropped sharply. The air felt thick, like something unseen was pressing down on him. His phone buzzed again. Unknown caller. He didn't answer this time. Instead, he turned on the laptop's webcam and pointed it behind him, using the screen as a mirror. At first, he saw nothing but rows of filing cabinets and stacks of old evidence boxes. Then, a shape, a tall, distorted figure standing in the reflection. Watching him, Carter whipped around, gun raised. Nothing, just an empty room. The static on his phone grew louder. The light above him popped, plunging the room into darkness. Then, right next to his ear, "Found you?" A cold hand grabbed his shoulder. Carter bolted. The truth? He didn't stop running until he was outside, gulping in the crisp night air. His hand shook as he called his partner, Detective Lisa Reyes. "Lisa, listen to me," he gasped. "I don't know what's going on, but I think I know." She cut him off. Her voice was shaken. "Carter, I think I'm next." His blood ran cold. "What?" "I just checked the latest security footage. You need to see it now." 20 minutes later, Carter arrived at Reyes' apartment. She had the footage loaded on her laptop. It was from a convenience store security camera, taken the night before. The footage showed a young man at the register. Then, without warning, his face twisted in terror. He stumbled backward, clawing at his throat. His body lifted off the ground, invisible hands dragging him upward. He struggled, his mouth opening in a silent scream. And then, for a split second, the screen, and there it was, the figure, not just in the mirror this time, not just in reflections. For the first time, it was visible, standing directly behind the victim. Reyes paused the frame. The thing's head was turned, facing the camera, looking right at them. Carter swallowed hard. "Why do you think you're next?" Reyes turned the laptop toward him, her face pale. "It's been showing up more," she whispered. "Every time I check the footage, it gets clearer, closer. And then, tonight, I was reviewing last night's security cams at the station." She pulled up another video. This time, it wasn't from a crime scene. It was from inside the precinct. The footage showed the empty evidence room. The door was closed. The lights were off. And then, without explanation, the door swung open. The camera's night vision flickered, trying to adjust to the darkness. A figure stepped into frame. It was the same thing they had seen in the mirrors, the same thing that had been killing people. It stood there, motionless. Then, slowly, it turned its head toward the camera. Reyes hit pause. "Carter," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't need her to say it. He already knew. Because the moment the creature turned, it was staring directly at him, as if it knew exactly where he was, and it was coming for him next.